Thank you. Good afternoon. Appreciate you joining me. I know it's always hard to go up after lunch, so I'll try to keep you manage your sugar crash from dessert or your food coma from the meal itself. My name is Merritt Maxim. I'm a director at CIS Technologies, and as John said, I want to talk a little bit about a survey that we've actually been working on with a third-party research firm called the Pointman Institute over the last year or so on global trends and bring your own identity. And this whole presentation actually has its genesis at CIS. So I first went to CIS at Vail 2 years ago, and it was upon the return, I was actually in the Dallas airport with a colleague, and we were talking about all the discussions we were having, and so felt there was a general need, or my analytical nature was asking for more kind of market data as to what was actually going on in the marketplace. We were hearing good discussions in trending, but instead we really could benefit from some more detailed analysis and kind of where the market was headed. So through some fits and starts, it's kind of taken us a while to get to that point, but I'm pleased to be able to share some of those findings with you here today, and hopefully engage your dialogue and discussion on this. Won't read through the abstract. You've obviously seen that. That's why you're here. If you're not here, there's other sessions in the other two rooms. I also wanted, before kind of went into the background, wanted to extend thanks to a couple of people who really helped make this happen. First is Mark Diodati, conference chair. Mark and I are long-time friends and colleagues. We cut our chops in product management at RSA back in the 90s. I was the secure ID product manager, where I usually introduced myself as a token product manager, meant literally, not figuratively. Most customers never got that joke, but I always try to do that here because in this crowd, some people might actually get it. And I also wanted to thank Andrew Nash, who also was with Mark and I at RSA at the same time frame. Many of you may know. He was actually, we engaged with him in actually the survey design and assessment of this, and provided some very valuable insights into kind of how to design and actually make this survey work. So those two people are very instrumental in actually helping this get to this point. That's by nature me, how to stalk and track me and some of the places I worked along the way. So as I said in the Dallas airport, we're talking about bringing your own identity or social login. A lot of discussion, is around there's obviously a lot of promise. The business sees a lot of value in it from a user experience. It helps reduce the complexity, reduces, what I'm calling registration fatigue. The process of having to register for yet another website. And for those of you who were in the NSTIC sessions yesterday, you certainly saw plenty of reference to some of the Jan-Rain stats about percentage of users who opt out of shopping carts when they're asked to register or create an account, and that number is actually much higher than you might expect. It's above 50%, and that's a real cost to the business. People leave my site, go somewhere else. That's a cost to me. And for those of you who haven't yet maybe experienced registration fatigue, I'll offer you some personal perspective. If you don't have teenage children or are going to have teenage children, you will experience registration fatigue when your children start calling and asking you to order things for them online that are not on Amazon, but on esoteric websites that they want for their various hobbies or tasks. My son is a hobbyist and does a lot of robotics work, and he orders lots of things from various sites that are all legitimate sites, but he doesn't have a credit card, and so he calls me and says, order this for me, Dad, and I have to go and create an account. So now I've got accounts at all these random sites. I'm on mailing lists. That's kind of one of the problems that we're really trying to talk about here. But the flip side of that is obviously, from the security standpoint, is I'm losing control. There's definite value to me to accepting a third-party identity, but what's the risk, or what's the control, and definitely different organizations have different perspectives on that in terms of what's the level of risk I'm willing to take, what's the underlying issuance process, how do I have confidence in that underlying identity, and so it's really that balance that organizations are trying to achieve, and that's really what we're trying to do in the course of the survey itself, was to really examine both business and IT attitudes around this concept. So what we did, as I said early in 2014, we worked on this survey. For those of you who don't know the Pointman Institute, it's a private, independent, third-party market research firm. They do great work. They do a lot of surveys with a lot of security vendors. Basically, the model is we develop the survey and then they go and execute it. We're blind from the survey collection and analysis. And Larry Pointman is a past security auditor and well-spoken and knows how to run an effective survey, and is really a valuable asset. And if you have needs for doing that kind of survey in the future, I certainly would recommend working with him. So we looked at a couple of different regions, what we wanted to do. Like I said, we picked a couple in APJ, Australia, and India. In Europe, it was Italy, Germany, France, the UK, Brazil, and Latin America, and then US and Canada. And what we did as those previous slides show, we wanted to kind of draw and contrast and compare the differences between business and IT around these trends. So we took the same survey design and asked it to two different sets of people. Asked it to people who self-identified as being in the IT organization, reporting up to the CISO or the CIO, and then we asked the same questions to line of business people, people who identified as working for, say, a marketing person or someone in the line of business. And the idea here was to try and draw out some of those differences. And so that's what we were trying to look at here. And obviously those personas have slightly different responsibilities. IT obviously has concern about data custody, online security, risk, whereas a business is about, you know, how am I going to grow, how am I going to help manage that. So that's the two types of personas we were trying to draw out in this survey. And this slide here kind of gives you just a sense of the total sample size. We ended up with about over 3,000 completed surveys across the globe. You can see we strove for pretty much a 50-50 split between business users and IT users in each region. And then obviously North America was our lead, but there was pretty even distribution across all the other geographies as well. We also had pretty even geographical distribution as well as vertical market distribution. And while our focus was on the large enterprise, i.e. people, companies with more than 1,000 employees, and more than 500 million revenue. We did include government agencies in this survey, so we did survey the public sector as well. And again, those are what some of the target tiles are. So this kind of gives you a sense of the scale and scope of the people that we were asking. And this survey was conducted in, say, the April-May timeframe. And I should note as a caveat, I'll get to at the end as well, this survey is not actually live yet. We'll be releasing the full results a week from today. So you're kind of getting an advanced preview of this. It'll be publicly available on our website for download. You can email or tweet at. I'll be tweeting out a link to it on Monday. But if you're interested for a copy of the report, it'll be available a week from Monday. And what I'm showing you today are really just some highlights, kind of my own personal highlights based on our own internal assessment of kind of what some of the key findings are. But the final report from Ponymon will have a much greater detail and some of the same data. So if we looked at the general findings, and we've already been briefing some analysts and others in the last week or so, there are no gotcha moments in this survey. We've worked with Ponymon before in other surveys, and I wouldn't say that anything came out and said, wow, that was a completely out of left field, that was not an expected finding. What we think we did find, and what others I think are confirming when we share the results, is we're finding good general confirmation of trends that we've been seeing, at conferences like this about kind of where the identity market is going. So we had, these are just some of the summary findings, the user experience and how to simplify that. That's what the business users see the value of bringing your own identity. It's the mobile use cases are of greater interest for anyone who's had to type in an alphanumeric password on a mobile device. You know that that's certainly a pain point that BYOID can help address. But there are still other areas of enhancements that both business and IT would like to see improve to help get full value of that, and that there are different opinions on the relative value of BYOID, whether you're a business user or an IT user. Some of that to be expected based on their different functional responsibilities, but these are just some of the general findings. So now I'll go into a couple of the questions that were highlighted in the survey. The survey was about 25 questions, took respondents about 15 minutes or so, and there was a pretty rigorous qualification program that Larry went through to ensure that we had people who met the criteria, both in terms of the size of the company and their relative role in the organization. So as I kind of teased in the previous slide, interest was highest for online and mobile users. So we asked, and this question was done deliberately, partially just out of some discussions I've had with customers or others who, when you mention BYOD, they narrow-mindedly assume, well, I'm not going to, when I hire a new person, I'm not going to use that person's Facebook ID as their credential. I'm going to create a new account from an Active Directory. And we're not saying that BYOD is a use case there. What we're saying is BYOD has value on the consumer side. And so in this specific question, we actually asked them, based on the type of end user, employee, contractor, retiree, job prospect, mobile user, or website users, which of those categories do you find BYOD of most interest? And not surprisingly, mobile and web were by far and away the most common scenarios. Again, not an earth-shattering finding, but a good confirmation of directionally what I think a lot of us have been hearing and talking about just amongst ourselves and in the general press. So that confirms that customers want that simple user experience, and that's what the business is looking at, is what they're looking at, seeing the value of bringing your own identity. Another question was, we asked what are some of the main reasons, and again, this was a multi-select question that had a bunch of different options to select from. And this is where you start to see some of the divergence between the IT and the business. So business, almost all the business users said it's about getting more information about the external users. Attributes. Now, we didn't specify what kind of attributes they wanted to get access to. It's just that concept that if I get more information about those identities, I know more about them, I can personalize the site, I can make recommendations, I can do a lot more things. That makes sense from a business standpoint. That's why they would see value in this. And it also makes my users easier for me to engage in my users. By comparison, the IT people, their biggest interest was on a cost basis. It's, I can outsource my password reset activities by relying on a third-party identity. So in other words, if I accept a Google identity, I'll trust that Google identity, but it's ultimately if the user has a problem with their password or credential, it's Google's problem, not mine. And again, that's a very, I'd say, traditional kind of IT view of the world, that anything that can help reduce costs is something I'm interested in. So there you see there's some differences between how the business views it versus what IT views it as. So then we had some other questions about what are some of the benefits that are most interest to your organization. And again, this is all the choices are listed there, and they could select all, none, or some of those. So again, if you look at what are some of the benefits, obviously the business user, again, it's the user experience and the simplified engagement jump right to the top as they're driving things that they're most interested in. The validation piece comes in as the third highest. But it was definitely the user experience was the key criteria that they see the value in. When you look at the IT side, you get kind of a mix. There's definitely that validation, and kind of the risk theme emerges as being some of the bigger areas of interest for them. The user experience, doesn't show up in those top three. So again, you see that divergence. I'm not necessarily saying that divergence is wrong. I mean, the different functional groups have different responsibilities. So in some ways, you would expect these kinds of findings based on the types of users that were surveyed. So before I get to this, so the next slide, and this is one that will probably generate a fair amount of discussion. So we asked users to rank on a scale of 1 to 7. We gave them a list of 7 identity providers and said, what's your preferred identity provider? We didn't ask them which ones they're using, which is important to distinguish because like the Gen-Rain survey, which many of you are familiar with, actually tracks usage of social login at sites. We just asked them, what's your preferred provider? And then we asked them on a scale of 1 to 7 to rank them. So that's what you see here. So what was your top ranked identity provider? If all things being equal and you were starting from scratch, what one would you use first? We asked the IT users that question, and we asked the business users that question. So IT comes out very strongly in PayPal. Poor Yahoo gets kicked to the curb. On the business side, you see a slightly wider divergence of opinion. And the one thing that I noticed here, and again, it's just a theory, I don't necessarily have any real strong way to validate this, but if you look at the lowest ranked providers for business users in Europe, you'll see in France, Germany, and the UK, Google ranks last. Now, for any of you who are following the press, you recall what was going on in the news with Google in the spring timeframe in the EU. It was all about safe searching, privacy, deleting of links, and there was a fair amount of coverage on that. And I think Google took somewhat of a PR hit about being maybe not being as trusted a provider in those countries as it was previously. And my interpretation is that's one of the reasons why you see them ranking here lower in those European countries for that reason. Again, that's a theory, but at least on the surface of it, seems to make some sense. So, and then the PayPal story, that's also interesting because if you compare this finding, say, with the Gen-Rain survey, PayPal ranks, I don't even think they even show up on that survey, or if they do, they're less than 5% of all logins are using PayPal. So you do see a disconnect between kind of what people view as a trusted provider versus what they're actually using. And some of it is a pure factor that Facebook and others just have more users. So from a purely business standpoint, if I want to get access to the largest market possible, I'm going to use Facebook. But I think PayPal scores well here because PayPal, in most cases, the PayPal account is linked to a financial institution. And so even just in my own personal life, I view PayPal as kind of a quasi-financial institution. I mean, I can send payments, I can do payments for that. So maybe, subconsciously, I treat PayPal with a perhaps higher level of trust than I do others because I view them as more of a financial institution than I do other online providers. That's just, again, a theory, but that would potentially suggest why PayPal scores very strongly there. So now the next thing was, if we ask this question, we now said, okay, now imagine you're just, you're not at work, you're at home, you're browsing the internet, and you're working around online. What are your preferred providers as an end user? So we asked the same question, same users. This was as your employer, now as your end user. And now the results change. PayPal drops out as an end user. Google immediately rises up within the IT user. I wouldn't say, again, this is necessarily surprising. Most IT people have Gmail accounts. If they're at home, they're probably logged into Gmail. Therefore, their credential is, they have a credential. Therefore, the social login is pretty straightforward. Not necessarily the case with PayPal. They don't necessarily log into PayPal continuously. They log into PayPal to do a transaction, and then they log back out. Yahoo, again, ranks lower here. But just to kind of put in perspective, on this scale of 1 to 7, vendors will end up with a numeric value here. And when we say top rank, the score was usually like 1.8, somewhere around 2, and the lowest ranked score was in the 5s. So they were, it wasn't as if there was a wide distribution. They were spread pretty close. You know, the second and third ranked provider were pretty close to Google. So although Google was top ranked, they weren't top ranked by a significant majority in this case. And you do see, again, on the business user side, you certainly see some more, again, divergence, particularly in some regions where, you know, Facebook emerges as being very popular, and even in some places, Yahoo emerges, like in the UK. I don't have an explanation on that, but that was, you know, again, some of the interesting comparisons between how people view this from a end user perspective versus in their employer. And some people have pointed out, I think correctly, that Facebook not scoring as well could be partially explained when you're at the employer. Some companies still block Facebook usage, so people may have interpreted that question saying, well, I can't accept Facebook at my employer because it's blocked anyway, and that could have influenced the results. I think it's an interesting conclusion. So then where this kind of gets interesting is now if you aggregate all the answers across all the geographies in these previous two questions now, and now look at, of all the 3,000 respondents, what was their top ranked and lowest ranked provider? Again, this is across all geographies. So in question 8 is as an employer, you see the comparison. So you see business users say as an employer, Facebook's last on my list. But then when you flip it around, say as an end user, who do you want to use? They say Facebook. Again, I don't necessarily have a crystal ball as to why that's the case, but it's certainly it's an interesting perspective. I think it's just a reflection of kind of how, you know, even as Ben Capes talking in his keynote about people kind of separating out their identity lives. They have their business life and their personal life, and it's harder to do that as they meld closer and closer together. But nonetheless, people do definitely have different perspectives about identity providers, whether they're viewing it as at the end user at home, just going on the internet, versus what they would use as their employer. So then we asked a few more questions about what are some of the things that would accelerate or improve BYOID adoption. Again, this was a list of some of the options here. Some of these were more definitely on the technical kind of product related side. But if you look at kind of where business users came out versus the IT, the validation processes still rank very high. But again, the business users, they're also still continue to be driving that user registration process. Anything that can simplify the process to get my users into the site is definitely a value to me. Whereas the IT people are saying, it's things like authentication, risk engines, things of that sort. That's definitely a value to me. It's going to reduce my risk, reduce my, you know, my exposure, and make me more interested in this type of situation. We also asked some questions more kind of on the attribute level in terms of what kind of data would further increase the value of an identity provider. And we gave them some of the options here. What's interesting here is although those attributes you could be viewed that they have value from a security standpoint because it would increase some knowledge about the user, the IT guys actually didn't come out very emphatically here saying that this information is useful, whereas the business user said this is very useful. And actually I interpret this slightly differently, saying the business users like this data. Yes, it does increase the confidence of the user, but more importantly, that gives me more data about the user that I can use to target and personalize the site. So it's definitely it's a source of data that it has multiple benefits to me as a business user. It's not just about it increases some confidence, but it also, I know your phone number, I know your mailing address, I now have some demographic data that I didn't have before that I can perhaps better use to target you or do information, get information about you. We then asked some questions about what are some of the other factors that you would use to enhance a digital identity. Obviously, in a lot of these cases, the actual identity itself is more or less password protected. There's not, maybe there's some additional out-of-band authentication processes, but it's still more or less username password based when you log into these accounts. So what are some of the things that you would like? Obviously, the mobile device merges very high. It's a simplicity play. Some of that stuff is invisible to the end user or requires very little interaction from them, whether it's IP address, time of day, device ID, geolocation. Those are all useful factors to me, and they don't require a lot of effort on the end user. So that's a win-win for the business and for me. IT obviously has a more technical orientation, interested in things like a PIN, maybe doing risk-based evaluation, other things like that that would increase the value. Again, seeing the differences here between kind of what the risk view of the business versus how IT looks at things. So to kind of bring this to a conclusion, and I've been kind of living and breathing the survey for several months now, and kind of trying to sum up what the kind of key view of this is, and this is kind of my highly elaborate visual art here that I created. But basically, the perspective that I kind of take out of this is that we're really looking at what I call a value-based view of identity that's emerging. Historically, identities were viewed very much as kind of a risk, an IT-based thing, and it was all about managing risk around that underlying identity. Today, and I think as we've seen in other sessions, identities have value. They're an asset. They're an asset to the business, and so there's value to the business in understanding those identities and managing those identities. There's still a risk approach around there about how I minimize the fraud and reduce my exposure, but it's also that value base. And so what you're seeing, I think, with things like social login and bring your identity is this concept of needing to find that balance between value-based and risk-based. And every organization is going to have to make an assessment, and it's going to take some time, but ultimately these things don't operate in silos anymore. And if they are, you got to work with your business or IT counterparts to bring them closer together, because that's how you can get the leverage and the value out of that. And I think that's what a lot of the NSTIC or these other initiatives are really all about. It's about finding where that balance is between what the business needs and what they require versus what IT is willing to concede from a risk and overall standpoint. And it's ultimately finding that balance. And so it's really about this. I mean, this is kind of, mom and apple pie, but I think it goes without saying it's a joint responsibility. You need that collaboration, and if your guys if you're not talking to business counterparts or IT counterparts, you should be, because that's how you're going to, I think, unlock some of the value of this. So as I kind of bring it to a close here, just as a wrap up, this survey, like I said, will be available next Monday, the 28th, ca.com. It should be right on the main page. I will tweet out links to the survey on the 28th. You can email me or tweet at me. There's certainly ample ways to get involved with the data, and be happy to, and certainly welcome any sharing and distribution of that survey. This is good market data that certainly we want to make available to the identity community. We're also doing a tweet chat, which is next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow at 1 p.m. For those of you who don't participate, this tweet chats are very informal, no invitation required. You basically just follow this hashtag, and we will be sending out a variety of questions based on data in the survey, and certainly would welcome and encourage your engagement in that tweet chat. And even if you're not able to participate, you can always go back in and look on that hashtag Tuesday night, and you can follow the discussion. I'll just go on for about an hour, and myself and other colleagues will be participating, and I certainly welcome you to participate. And we're also doing a webinar that Larry pointed on. We'll go in a little bit more detail on some of the results on August the 7th. Again, I'll be tweeting out information about that on Twitter, and also you can contact me directly. But there's some other ways for you to get access to information. We'll also be doing an infographic that will highlight some of the key findings in that. And again, we certainly want to make this an asset and put this out to the community to use. And I think the other interesting trend for us now that we've got this baseline is this now opens the possibility for us to revisit this data in 12 months or 18 months to start doing some trending, to issue the same survey again a year from now and kind of see where the market's evolved. We've done that with some other work with Ponemon, and that's usually very interesting. So that's also, I think, an area of focus for us, and perhaps the next CIS we might have an update on this, or maybe the one after that. But I think I'm at the end of my time. I'll take Q&A out in the hallway, because I think we're on a fairly tight timetable, or there's a few minutes to come up here. But thanks for your attention, and I'll be here through tomorrow. So if you want to talk about the survey, happy to to have a discussion. So just look for me. So thank you. Thank you.